Life has a peculiar way of serving justice, especially to those who believe money can buy everything. 10 years ago, on a crisp autumn morning in Manhattan, Alexander Cole walked out of his penthouse apartment, leaving behind not just his wedding photos and a dozen roses on the dining table, but also his wife of 8 years, Sarah. The note he left was brief. "I need more from life. The divorce papers are with my lawyer." Those words marked the end of what many had considered a fairy tale romance between a self-made tech billionaire and a dedicated pediatric nurse. But for Alexander, Sarah had become a reminder of his humble beginnings, a past he desperately wanted to erase. He had traded her for Victoria, a 23-year-old model who graced magazine covers and moved in circles he now considered worthy of his status. The tabloids had a field day, painting Sarah as the discarded wife who wasn't glamorous enough for her husband's new lifestyle. What they didn't know was that the day Alexander left, Sarah had been preparing to share news that would have changed everything. Instead of crumbling, Sarah chose silence and dignity. She disappeared from New York's social scene, leaving behind whispers and speculation. Alexander married Victoria in a lavish ceremony in the Maldives. Their photos splashed across social media and magazines. He had everything he thought he wanted: youth, beauty, and status. Fast forward to present day. Alexander's tech empire had grown even bigger, but something felt hollow in his gold-plated world. That's when fate decided to play its hand. During the opening of his new children's hospital wing, a PR move suggested by his board of directors, he froze in his tracks. There, leading the pediatric department, was Sarah. But she wasn't alone. Around her, like a protective circle, were 4 identical faces, 3 boys and a girl, about 9 years old. Their features were hauntingly familiar. They had his mother's eyes and his father's smile. Time seemed to stop as realization dawned on him. The children were pointing at the huge portrait of him in the lobby, whispering among themselves. Sarah's eyes met his across the room, and in that moment, Alexander felt the weight of his choices crash down on him. The quadruplets weren't just any children. They were his. The news Sarah never got to share that autumn morning had multiplied by 4. While he had been building his empire of glass and steel, she had been raising their children alone, shielding them from the media circus that their story would have created. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had donated millions to build this hospital wing, only to discover that his own flesh and blood had been growing up within its walls, under the care of the woman he had so carelessly discarded. The children were now approaching him, curiosity in their eyes, unaware that they were meeting their father for the first time. Victoria, standing beside him in her designer dress and perfect makeup, sensed the tension. She looked between Alexander and the children, noting their resemblance, her perfectly manicured fingers gripping her champagne glass tighter. As the children drew closer, Alexander realized that all his billions couldn't buy back the years he had lost. The question now wasn't about money or status. It was about redemption. Could he make amends for abandoning not just his wife, but his own children? And more importantly, would Sarah and the quadruplets even want him in their lives? The answer to those questions would change everything. But first, he had to face the consequences of his choices, starting with the 4 pairs of eyes that were now looking up at him with innocent curiosity. Alexander's throat went dry as the quadruplets stood before him, their matching blue backpacks decorated with different superhero pins, a detail that made them uniquely individual despite their identical features. The oldest by 2 minutes, Michael stepped forward with the natural confidence of a born leader. "Are you the man who built this place?" he asked, his voice clear and unwavering. Before Alexander could respond, Sarah appeared behind them, placing protective hands on their shoulders. "Children, we need to head back to the ward. Your patients are waiting," she said calmly, her voice carrying the same warmth he remembered, though now tinged with a strength he had never known she possessed. The children, Michael, Thomas, James, and little Sophie, looked disappointed but nodded obediently. They were clearly used to helping their mother at the hospital, something that spoke volumes about how Sarah had raised them. As they turned to leave, Sophie looked back and waved, her innocent gesture piercing Alexander's heart like an arrow. Victoria's perfectly manicured nails dug into Alexander's arm. "Who are they?" she whispered, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. The resemblance was undeniable. These children were living proof of his past, a past he had tried so hard to bury under layers of wealth and success. The rest of the opening ceremony passed in a blur. Alexander delivered his rehearsed speech about giving back to the community, but his eyes kept drifting to the back of the room where Sarah efficiently directed her staff, her white coat a symbol of the life she had built without him. The quadruplets worked alongside her, helping to distribute information packets and assist elderly patients to their seats, a family unit complete without him. Later that evening, in his office overlooking the city lights, Alexander sat alone, nursing a glass of scotch. Victoria had left in a fury after he finally confirmed her suspicions about the children. "You never told me you had children," she had hissed, her carefully constructed facade cracking. "Do you know what this could do to our image?" Her words echoed in his mind. Our image. When had his life become all about maintaining appearances? He pulled out his phone and found himself scrolling through the hospital's website. There was Sarah, featured in an article about innovative pediatric care programs. The piece mentioned her as a single mother of quadruplets who had revolutionized child-centered healthcare approaches. The article revealed snippets of the life he had missed. Michael was already showing interest in medicine, following in his mother's footsteps. Thomas had a gift for technology and had helped develop a child-friendly patient monitoring app. James was an artist who painted murals in the children's wards, while Sophie had started a buddy program pairing older kids with younger patients. His children had inherited more than just his looks. They had his drive and intelligence, but unlike him, they used these gifts to help others. Sarah had raised them to be everything he should have been but wasn't. A notification popped up on his phone. Another tabloid story about his latest tech acquisition. The headline read, "Tech Titan Expands Empire." But for the first time in years, the words felt hollow. What was an empire worth without a legacy to share it with? As dawn broke over the city, Alexander made a decision. He needed to talk to Sarah, to understand the story of his children, to know about their first words, their first steps, all the moments he had traded for wealth and status. But would Sarah even give him 5 minutes of her time? And more importantly, did he deserve it? 3 days passed before Alexander found the courage to approach Sarah. He waited outside the hospital's staff entrance, his usual designer suit replaced by casual clothing. When Sarah emerged from her shift, exhaustion visible on her face, she noticed him immediately but kept walking. He followed, maintaining a respectful distance. "Sarah, please. 5 minutes is all I ask," he called out softly. She stopped, turned, and studied him with eyes that had long since cried their last tear over him. "You get 3, she replied, checking her watch. "The kids are waiting at their piano lessons." In those precious minutes, Alexander learned more about true wealth than his billions had ever taught him. Sarah hadn't kept the children a secret out of spite. She had protected them from becoming tabloid fodder. She had discovered she was carrying quadruplets 2 days after he left, but pride and determination had stopped her from telling him. "They deserved better than to be an afterthought in your grand new life," she explained. That evening, Victoria left their penthouse, her designer luggage packed with precision. Her parting words stung with truth. "You've been chasing something that was never missing from your life in the first place." The divorce papers arrived the next morning. Over the next few weeks, Alexander tried to establish a cautious connection with his children. It started small, funding new medical equipment for Sarah's pediatric ward, attending the children's school science fair from a distance, watching James paint his latest mural in the children's ward. The quadruplets were curious about him, but Sarah had raised them to be discerning despite their young age. One rainy afternoon, as he watched them through the hospital cafeteria window, Sophie spotted him. Instead of waving like before, she walked over, her brothers following protectively. "Why do you keep watching us?" she asked directly, her mother's strength evident in her young voice. Before Alexander could formulate a response, Thomas spoke up. "We know who you are. We found the old photos in Mom's memory box." Michael and James moved closer to their sister, a unified front. "Mom never said anything bad about you," James added, "but actions speak louder than words." The simplicity of a child's wisdom hit Alexander harder than any business negotiation ever had. These 9-year-olds, wise beyond their years, weren't impressed by his wealth or status. They had grown up with something far more valuable: their mother's unconditional love and unwavering support. As he stood there, facing his children, Alexander realized that the next few moments would define the rest of his life. The hospital intercom crackled with an emergency announcement, calling for Sarah. The quadruplets turned instinctively toward the sound of their mother's name being paged. In that moment, Alexander saw what he had walked away from: not just Sarah, but a chance at a real family, built on love rather than appearance. The children started to leave, but Sophie paused. "Mom's birthday is next week," she said quietly. "She works too hard. She thinks we don't notice, but we do." With that, they disappeared down the corridor, leaving Alexander with a choice that money couldn't solve. For the first time in 10 years, he had to decide what kind of man he truly wanted to be: the billionaire with everything money could buy, or the father his children might someday forgive. Sophie's words about Sarah's birthday sparked an idea in Alexander's mind, but fate had other plans. That evening, his phone lit up with an urgent message. His company's board of directors had called an emergency meeting. The news was devastating. A hostile takeover attempt was threatening everything he'd built. The timing couldn't have been worse. As he sat in his corporate boardroom surrounded by anxious executives, Alexander learned that his biggest competitor had been quietly buying shares through shell companies. They weren't just after his company. They wanted to strip it for parts and shut down his philanthropic projects, including the hospital wing where Sarah worked. The irony wasn't lost on him. The very hospital where his children spent their days, where Sarah had built her legacy, was now at risk because he'd spent years focusing on profits over people. The board suggested immediate cost-cutting measures, starting with the unnecessary charitable endeavors. Meanwhile, across town, Sarah faced her own crisis. The hospital's primary funding source had suddenly pulled out, putting her innovative pediatric programs at risk. Unknown to her, this was directly connected to the attack on Alexander's company. The quadruplets, wise beyond their years, noticed their mother's distress as she worked late into the night, making calls and searching for alternative funding. During one of his now regular discreet visits to watch his children from afar, Alexander overheard Michael and Thomas discussing their mother's situation. "Mom hasn't slept properly in days," Michael whispered to his brother. "The buddy program might have to stop, and James's art therapy sessions too." The weight of his past choices pressed down on Alexander as he realized the full scope of what was happening. His corporate battles were directly threatening the lives his children and Sarah had built. The takeover wasn't just about business anymore, it was personal. To make matters worse, the media had somehow caught wind of the quadruplets' existence. Reporters began camping outside the hospital, hoping to catch a glimpse of the billionaire's secret family. Sarah's carefully constructed peaceful life was crumbling, and it was, once again, because of him. One rainy evening, as Alexander was leaving another tense board meeting, he found all 4 children waiting by his car. They had sneaked away from their after-school activities, something they had never done before. Sophie, usually the quietest, spoke first. "Mom's crying in her office. She thinks we can't hear her." James held up one of his drawings, a family portrait that included Alexander, though he had never posed for it. "We used to think we didn't need you," Thomas added, "but maybe we were wrong." Michael, ever the protective oldest, finished their thought. "But if you're going to help, you need to decide if we're worth more than your company." At that moment, Alexander's phone buzzed with an ultimatum from the hostile company: sell his controlling shares now or watch everything collapse. They were offering him enough money to remain a billionaire many times over, but accepting would mean sacrificing the hospital wing and everything Sarah had built. As he stood there in the rain, looking at his children's hopeful faces, Alexander realized this wasn't just about redemption anymore. It was about choosing between the empire he had built and the family he had abandoned. The quadruplets were offering him a second chance, but it would come at a price he never expected to pay. The next morning's board meeting would require his final decision. As he drove home that night, 4 sets of identical eyes haunted his thoughts, along with Sophie's parting words: Mom always says that doing the right thing isn't supposed to be easy. Maybe that's why you never did it before. The morning of the decisive board meeting arrived with unprecedented media attention. News of Alexander's secret family had leaked, sending his company's stock price plummeting. But as he straightened his tie and prepared to enter the boardroom, a commotion outside caught his attention. Sarah stood there, still in her hospital scrubs, looking exhausted but determined. "The children told me everything," she said, her voice steady. "You don't have to sacrifice your company. We've survived before. We'll survive again." Her selflessness, even after everything he'd done, struck him to his core. But before he could respond, his assistant rushed out with breaking news. The hostile takeover wasn't just about business. The competing company had orchestrated everything, including pulling the hospital funding, specifically to force Alexander into an impossible choice. In that moment, looking at Sarah's concerned face, Alexander finally understood what real wealth meant. Without a word, he walked into the boardroom and made an announcement that would change everything. He was transferring his controlling shares, not to the competing company, but to a trust he just created. The beneficiaries, his 4 children, with Sarah as the trustee until they turned 21. The board erupted in chaos, but Alexander wasn't finished. He revealed his master stroke. He'd spent the last week secretly buying back shares through his personal accounts. Combined with the trust's shares, the family now held an unbreakable majority. The hostile takeover wasn't just stopped, it was impossible. But the real surprise came from Sarah. As the board members filed out, she revealed her own news. The Quadruplets' innovative ideas, Michael's medical insights, Thomas's technology solutions, James's art therapy, and Sophie's buddy program had caught the attention of a major international healthcare foundation. They wanted to implement their programs globally, with Sarah leading the initiative. Alexander watched in awe as Sarah pulled out a folder. "The foundation wants to partner with your company's healthcare division," she explained. "They approached me weeks ago, but I wanted to see if you'd make the right choice on your own first." Her test had revealed the man he'd become, not the man who left her 10 years ago. As they stood there, the children burst into the boardroom, having escaped their nanny once again. But this time, they weren't alone. They'd brought Alexander's mother, the grandmother they'd been secretly meeting for years. "Did you really think I wouldn't recognize my own grandchildren?" she asked Alexander, her eyes twinkling. "I've been helping Sarah all along, waiting for you to wake up and see what really matters." The media outside got their story, but not the one they expected. Instead of a corporate takeover, they witnessed the merger of 2 worlds, business and family, as Alexander announced the creation of the Cole Family Foundation, dedicated to revolutionary pediatric care programs worldwide. That evening, as the family gathered in Sarah's modest home for a delayed birthday celebration, Sophie presented her mother with a drawing. It showed all of them together, including Alexander, but with one addition, a wedding cake. "Just a suggestion," she said innocently, while her brothers tried to hide their grins. Sarah and Alexander exchanged a look that held 10 years of history, pain, growth, and maybe, just maybe, the possibility of a future. "We'll need to earn that cake," Sarah said softly, but she was smiling. Alexander nodded, understanding that this wasn't an ending, but a beginning, one where wealth was measured not in dollars, but in the laughter of children and the strength of family bonds. As they cut Sarah's birthday cake together, Alexander realized that sometimes life's greatest fortunes aren't kept in bank accounts. They're found in the second chances we never expected to get. 1 year later, the Cole Family Foundation had transformed the landscape of pediatric care across 3 continents. The Quadruplets' innovative programs had become the gold standard in children's hospitals worldwide. Michael's patient comfort protocols were being taught in medical schools, Thomas's healthcare apps had won innovation awards, James's art therapy programs had spread to hundreds of hospitals, and Sophie's buddy system had become a global movement. Sarah continued to lead the foundation's initiatives, her dedication touching countless lives. She and Alexander had taken things slowly, rebuilding trust through small moments, shared coffee breaks between meetings, family dinners where business talk was strictly forbidden, and Sunday afternoons in the park where the children taught their father how to fly kites and build sandcastles. The media eventually lost interest in their story, especially when they realized there would be no scandal to uncover. Instead, they found only the quiet redemption of a man learning to measure success not in dollars, but in the proud smiles of his children. Victoria had moved on, finding her own path in life. She sent the children a kind note once, congratulating them on their program's success, and wished their family well. The gesture spoke volumes about how people could grow and change when they allowed themselves to. Alexander's mother became a regular fixture in their lives, hosting weekly family dinners where she shared embarrassing stories from Alexander's childhood, much to the quadruplets' delight. "Your father once wanted to be a street magician," she'd tell them, making Alexander blush and Sarah laugh. On a warm spring evening, as the family gathered in their favorite ice cream parlor, the same one where Sarah and Alexander had their first date 15 years ago, Sophie pulled out another drawing. This time, it showed their family standing in a garden, surrounded by flowers. Sarah was wearing a simple white dress, and Alexander was in a suit. "Still just a suggestion," Sophie said with a wink. 2 months later, that drawing became reality. In a private ceremony in Sarah's hospital garden, surrounded only by family and their closest friends, they renewed their vows. The quadruplets served as both flower girls and best men, and Alexander's mother cried happy tears as she watched her son finally become the man she'd always known he could be. The real magic, though, wasn't in the ceremony. It was in the little moments that followed. Alexander learning to make pancakes with the children on Sunday mornings, often failing spectacularly but trying anyway. It was in Sarah teaching him how to help with homework, and the children showing him their secret hideout in the hospital's rooftop garden. Life wasn't perfect. There were still board meetings to attend, hospitals to run, and the occasional family disagreement. But now these challenges were faced together with understanding and patience. The billions in Alexander's bank account seemed insignificant compared to the wealth of watching his children grow, of rebuilding trust with Sarah, of being part of a family that valued love over luxury. As for the competing company that had tried to force Alexander's hand, they eventually became partners in the foundation's global initiatives, proving that even the fiercest business rivalries could be transformed into something positive when the focus shifted from profit to purpose. The story of the billionaire who lost everything to find something more valuable became a quiet legend in business schools, not for its drama, but for its lesson. True wealth isn't counted in corporate acquisitions or stock prices, but in the moments we choose love over power, family over fortune, and redemption over pride. And every year, on Sarah's birthday, the family still gathers in their modest home, sharing cake and dreams, reminding each other that sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as its biggest challenges.